Hey, so I'm going to try to explain how I make sprockets for tracks. In the old days, I would model in CAD each link, center to center, array them into a closed loop matching, the sprocket I want. This was very time consuming and there's always be some tolerance or it would not match. So I don't do this anymore. It takes way too much time and there's still a lot of trial and error. So I don't do this anymore. What I do now is I take the track I want to use and I close it. I make a loop. Typically, I found that I always have to go one track link less or one tooth less because it's rubbing, it's too big in the tank, it's rubbing too much or too tight. So then once I have it, I try to find something that fits in it, like a bottle cap or a cylinder, something I printed. Just something quick to have it. Then I measure that cylinder. So it gives me a base diameter. I can then print it again, place it in there, see if it fits. So this is the base diameter start with. Then I look at how many track links there are, and I divide on the CAD 360 divided by how many there is. So there's going to be the tooth, and it's going to be the flat spot. So this distance here, it's like this. Let's see if I show it. Yeah. So this is half a flat spot, and this is the other. So it's like the mountain and valley. So if we look at this dimension, the width of the tooth is, I measure the track like the hole, and I don't want to be too tight in there, so I give a bit of slot. So I know what a distance is. Now the tip of the tooth, that's a different story. That has to do with the engagement. So visualize the track being straight here and measure it to say, okay, here's a hole, here's the next hole, here's the next hole. And once in the software I array the tooth based on the quantities, it's like, well, it has to channel inside nicely. So I hand draw the profile of the tooth. So some Russian tanks, for example, they have very pointy tooth that stick way out. I don't like that. I kind of like myself squarier. It's a little safer for little hands, and that is really when, in extreme conditions, they don't want the track to jump or they want a lot of slop so the track stays on. I play with track tension and track weight. Plastic is fine. And it's okay. Sometimes track jumps, but at this scale, it's not like we're breaking our backs to put the track back on. So I draw a tooth. I need to allocate, if I zoom in, right? So it's like in a quarter, in a portion, there needs to be the distance from here to here. This distance combined is going to be the distance of a flat. And then this distance here, we know it's the root of the tooth. So in the software, if I look at from the front view, I don't build the entire sprocket. I build half of it and I mirror it. Later on, I design the grooves for evacuating the mud and whatnot, but in the prototyping phase, I just do one mirror it. I use Tamiya 3mm hex shafts. 3D printing of ABS is really fast, like 20, 30 minutes, get one, and then test it. So the test is very important, is to fit in a closed track, not an open track. And here's the secret, it should not be tight, it should be loose everywhere, but not too loose, but you should be able to feel it, that you can freely move it in all directions, whether it's side to side, axially in all directions. So the tooth ideally are tapered, so that, they find the holes nicely. There's a bit of gap, up and down, side to side, smooth. Then the other test I do is I open the track, I lay a track flat inside out and roll the sprocket on. It should be like it should roll down very smoothly, like a car down a track, pretty much. That's a true test. It should not stop. If it stops, then you know something's wrong. So it should go roll down the track. Then the other test I do is I hold the metal shaft of the sprocket and turn it by hand with a loose track on it, and it should feed it nicely. If it jumps, then you know there's work to be done. So then is to spin it slowly and see, okay, what's going on? Is it jumping at every link? Is the distance wrong? Or is it somewhere? Most of the refinement I find myself doing is the point of the tooth. So again, is to visualize, okay, where is the opening? The opening is in here. The tooth has to be, I adjusted, this is on the drawing. I know what the base is, and I know how tall the tooth is because I just use the thickness of the track. I don't want to protrude further. You can if you want to. The reason for this is if I make very thin tooth, like what the Russians do, they use steel, I use plastic. A small point will hurt and can also be crushed because there's not enough plastic there. So I kind of like to have thick tooth ends. Then I look on the drawing to see, okay, what is the required? So sometimes I can get away with very square tooth, and some, like the tiger tracks, and sometimes they have to be pointier. Again, the track design also is critical on the shape, the geometry of this. So I see myself doing 2 or 3 refinements to get the perfect track. Most of the issues I have is also the side to side. You know, sometimes when I print and it's like, okay, I have to, I found myself using a spacer or redoing it because it was too tight. And that's critical. It's like there should be, in both directions, there should be a tolerance. So let's say 5 thousandths, or initially, so that's 10 thousandths total, right, side to side. And then again, when the sprocket is in the track, it should be able to be free, it should not be tight. You know, in axially, side to side, etc. What else? So this method, trial and error, is pretty fast. I had way better results. As opposed to modeling the whole thing like in the old days. I'm sure there's a formula, but the beauty of 3D printing is you can quickly test it. Now, the other thing with tracks is they get jammed, they get stuffed with things. So I try to vent them, and by trying to visualize where I can channel the mud, that gets tricky, it's not perfect. And the other two is you want to capture the horns. So, so the Panther track has, the Panther track has 2 horns like this, but the Panzer III I've been using is a single, which is much easier because then we have standard bogies like the molar, and we know that the track is fitting in these holes, and the horn is held by the wheels there. So that's something to consider. On some tanks, to prevent track jumping, they actually have discs holding. So if I draw it cross sections like this, I think American tanks and the early Leopard, we have this. So the track horn is captive here. You can try. I found that sometimes I like it free, so if there's junk does not necessarily jam it. But it's trial and error. You can easily add those. Now, where was it? I'm using tooths going through the holes, but if you look online, Action Robot Punch use the design that was used on the molar, which is what the T34 used, which is the drive sprocket actually has internal indentations where the track horns get fed. The advantage is you don't have sharp pointed tooth. If you have little ones at home, it's more toy looking. It's a different design. It works equally as good. If you look at his video of his flak molar he did, his tracks don't jump and it works really well. I cannot help you in the geometry of this because I never do that. I always use the old school poking tooth that feed in the track holes. But his method is equally as good. The advantage is you can have a drive track that looks like a spline wheel, and then you can have design of spokes, whatever. Just like the stock toy, it looks cleaner. I'm more of a tooth guy, so that's, either work. Another thing too is to use hex shafts. Tamiya is 3mm. There's also some other sizes. It's convenient to swap them out. And if you want to go on the long term, what I would recommend is I used to make the entire sprocket of 1 or 2 pieces that I glue that I would put on the gearbox. It might be a good idea to design a hub that drives on your mech, and then let's say you make that hub like a large hex shaft, and then you design your sprocket as reversible, so you mirror it. I have an inner and outer. So the outer typically has the holes for clearing debris or to look cool, or they can be identical if you don't care. But the advantage is if they're reversible, you can swap them. And why I would use a hub like this is that as you change your design, you could just slide them on, like friction fit, slide them on, or have a screw holding or whatever. But you could leave the hard press-fitted shaft or the hub guy, and you swap your sprocket if you break them or if you make some design changes. When you play in snow, in mud, things happen. So sometimes you make a small change, like, okay, am I gonna need some little guides to hold the horns here, or am I having issues with stones getting stuck in there, or mud packing in there, or snow sometimes packs in it and jams it that the track doesn't feed. So at that time, on the long term, it's good to plan ahead so that you not like torturing yourself to swap the tracks, make it easy in and out, and you can service them if you break them with rocks and whatnot. I use plastic only, it works just fine. We're not going hobby grade like 1/16 scale, so for what I'm doing, it's fine. If you have any other question, let me know. I'll be glad to help.